Hello, I've been working on a different Unity project other than that one robotic arm pizza game that I was showing off before. I wanted to focus on something a little more uh, platformy, simple, objective, uh, character movement based game. So I've made a simple game here that I'm going to show off. I'm just going to jump right into it. In a way, it's kind of like a Snake clone, but not really. It's got a few more complicated things to it. You start off with just these three body segments of the Snake character right there, and I've got a few things to show off here. In the top left, you can see I got a UI element here showing how many points are remaining in the scene, and that happens automatically. I've scripted it so that it finds everything with the tag of point and adds it to an array, adds it to the array, and then finds the length of the array. So it's the original array doesn't have a specific size. It's constantly updating the size to the amount of point objects in the scene. So when I do that, I can go over here, I can grab these points. Well, I just grabbed one there, but you see the number went down from 5 to 4. And when I take them all, it goes down to 0. And of course I'll add some kind of script or just edit the game manager to look at that value and determine whether the game ended, or switch scenes or open some kind of portal to the next scene or level. And it may have noticed each time you grab a point, just like in the game Snake, the length of the body increases just a bit. So that's one function of the game that I've added so far. Different one that I added to make the gameplay a little more spicy is these little power pad things. They do different functions. Like these dark orange ones will throw the Snake up in the air like that, and these lighter orange ones, yellow ones, will launch you forward a bit. And let's see. Oh, I forgot a couple more things that I wanted to show off. Right now, just because I have the power to, because I put it in the script, I will just spawn more body segments without getting the points. Another thing I wanted to show off is that I've added this function where if you impact one part of your body, it'll launch you up, so you can use that to jump up to higher surfaces. I'm going to put in some more easily detected way than detecting impacts. Somehow grab some kind of trigger detection between each point, and if it detects that the head has entered that, the 0th element of that array, the head has entered that area, make it jump, because it's fairly easy to actually end up going through the middle of the Snake body segments and not end up hitting it for the jump. Right here I'm hitting it every time, but it's not gonna always do that, and it would probably be frustrating to end up trying. Yeah, right there I went right through the body, so it didn't actually do anything. First thing I'm going to talk about, well, I already described the point system, but so the way I'm achieving that is very easy. There's not even really a script on these point objects, I believe. Yeah, there's no script on these point objects. They're just tagged with the point tag, and when they're impacted by the head of the Snake, it detects the object from the impact, finds out its tag, and if its tag happens to be point, then it deletes the object and instantiates more body segments at the back of the Snake, making it longer. So I don't know if this is really a good way of doing this, but for the Snake body part, I have this effect space right here, and it's just a really really large trigger box, and every time there's an object within that trigger box that fits the description of a body segment, like it has, I'll go into my prefabs right here with the body parts, I'll open it up. When it has this tag, tag is player, that's actually used for different exceptions. This layer, when it's on the body layer, it'll add it to that array, and the way the array works right here is I can go down and here's the actions of the body segments. I can look over here. It's just running a for loop through the size of the arrays, going through each element of the array, and for the position, it's having the I position plus 1 lerping to the position of the next object in the array. So each element in the array going from one to the next is trying to copy the same position of the next part. So when I just go into play mode, you can see that the ball before the head is trying to copy the position of the ball before it, in front of it, and so on and so forth. So the farthest ball is trying to capture that one. And I don't know if this is really I like the way the system works, but for instantiating the objects behind the snake, I don't know if this is the best way to have done this, but I have this aim block here. It just happens to end up right inside this box right here, but it'll move when I press play because it's part of the script. The way I have it is set to be at the furthest position, the last part of the array, and it's set to, with a vector 3, look at the second to last part of the array. So it's always trying to look at the second to last part of the array, and then I have a spawn point as a child of that aim block, and that is making sure that it's always being spawned directly behind it. And I thought that was an interesting way, because if you try and spawn it directly behind the object, it'll sometimes get confused with world space and things like that, and try and just spawn it relative to the X and Z position of the actual world, and not it won't take into account the position and rotation of the actual final element in the array. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And if we go back into the script here, I wouldn't call it a messy script. It could definitely be consolidated, because it's a pretty big one. I probably should put it in other scripts and then have those interact with each other, but I'm just going to go through the script right now and describe certain aspects of it that work. So let's just go through the parts up here before the actual implementation in the start and update functions. So I have these bools here, use 2 key and use 4 key. Those are set false to begin. I'll have a menu that you can interact with those, but I'll show you what they do right away, because speed and jump control, blah blah blah. Let's see. So here's the actual controls. So if use 2 key, so it'll just use the A and D key controls. So you would just use A and D relative to the forward direction of the head of the snake. So if I wanted to turn left, I would press A, and then turn left again. I press A, left, 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 left. Just pressing A, D, 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 and I'm just switching between those 2 keys. But I have a separate key system that I have there just in case someone would want to use that, but I don't think it gets kind of complicated, where you would be able to use just the WASD keys, the full set of the WAS keys, to move left, right, up, and down. So if I wanted to do this direction, I would press W. If I did this, A, down, S, right, D. But I think it's a lot more simple to just use the A and D keys in my experience so far. I actually don't know if I showed this off yet. Another thing I added, which I think is really interesting, is this system where if the player is obscured by an object, it'll actually lower the opacity of that object while maintaining the original color, just dropping the alpha value. And I'll show how I did that in a little bit too. It's kind of interesting. So let's just jump back into the script. So going all the way back to the top. So here's the body segment array. I don't know why, because this was a while ago before I really understood how arrays worked. I have it set as a finite value for the max objects in the array, but really I should have that value constantly changing dependent on how many objects are in the array instead of being a finite value. But for now I just have it set to some high amount that it will never be reached because I never put that many points in the scene, and I'll never probably put 1000 body segments when testing it out. This is something I just recently implemented right here, this distance. Oh no, that's a different section. I'll show that in a second. The distance from the floor thing right here is so when the head is a certain distance from the floor, I'm applying greater gravity multipliers over time so that it does kind of an interesting arc, and it will never just stay in the air for too long. This body magnetism, or MPOW figure I have here, is what's affecting how much each body segment wants to reach the position of the next body segment. So they're pretty close right here. So if I take this out of maximization and I bring this up so you can see better, if I go on the affect and then I go to the MPOW, if I press play and then I turn it to a position where you can see it better, if I change this and I bring it down, well, it's too far down, negative actually, I'm affecting how much these body segments are trying to reach for each other, or copy the rotation and position of the next one. And if I turn it out really high, they'll probably bump into each other a lot. Not current info there. So if I turn it up to a ridiculous amount, they'll just start smacking into each other. Like that. And that's interesting because I can use that to, because as you can see here when I'm turning, the current MPOW, it's being affected. It's being cut in half for just a second to create that really nice fluid motion where it seems like they're stopping and trying to catch up for a second when you turn. But also because the speed is increasing, I have that set there so that it's more fluid in the turn as well. So I think that looks pretty interesting and I like it a lot. So I'm gonna undo that so that it's back where I want it. Yeah, 30 is a good amount. And so I have that MPOW figure so I could set it when to what I want, and the current MPOW will try and reach that. It's always good to have two different values for the target and the current amount so that you can add multipliers using power-ups and stuff like that. Jumping height, it's right there, and a bool to show whether or not the character is jumping. Super jump, that's for the pads that you saw earlier, and the boost pads. Directional bools are what dictates the movement, because the movement's actually not, I'm not adding forces to the movement. I know right here it seems like I'm probably adding a force to the head of the snake so that it moves in a certain direction, but that's not actually what's happening. If we if I increase the speed here for just a second, oh, way too much, but I'll just go back and do that. Let's see, speed, let's turn that up to 1.4 so we can get to the edge quicker. If I go over to the edge of the level, I have it so that these little boxes on the edge of the level, I have the head of the snake move towards a specific box dependent on the movement bools that I've set up. See, there's that box at the edge again, and it's matching the X and Z position dependent on where it is, which side of the map it is set to, it is matching the position of the head element in the array. So the reason that's interesting, just set that back. The reason I have that set up is I noticed when I was adding forces to it, the body parts would sway or not follow kind of the exact grid movement. I wouldn't call it a grid movement, but I want it to travel pretty much exactly on the true X and true Z axes. I don't want it to travel diagonally, so I am having it move towards an object that is matching the exact X or Z position of the head, so that it's not moving out from that specific destination. So it works pretty well. On to the next part. So these directional bools, when I press, I have forward set as no input, because when I was creating it, when you start, you're not pressing a key. So moving forward, I called it no input for some reason, even though it should be set to straight. But go left, go right, reverse. So conditionally, when these are set here, I just have it if it's set to forward and you press A on the 2 key setup, it will go left. And if it is going right and you press A, it'll go forward. If it's going left and you press A, it'll go back. So I think that's pretty straightforward. The WAS key obviously is a little different, but I'm not really going to explain that one because I don't use that system, and I might just get rid of it in the future. But, you know, choices, options are always good. Let's see, where was I? Time management, that's just for like cooldowns and stuff. I have that there. This is specifically for finding the head of the snake, so I don't have to every single time put into other scripts parts 0 dot or finding components from that. It's a little bit easier to just have the rigid body of this if I want to enact some kind of force on it for jumping and such. Speed management is just a move speed. Directional targets, so when it's moving towards those objects on the edges of the map, that's what these game objects are right here. That left one is here, left, right, forward, back. Those are the objects that it's targeting. The vector 3 dot move towards, it's just moving towards those objects. So this C right here, that was just to increment on a separate function, not from the for loop. It's not really important. The real array position I have, that's just detecting, it's just giving me back how many pieces are in that array of the body segments. So that's pretty useful information for a lot of reasons. This public bool here crashed. I'll have that for more of an endgame scenario where once you hit something of a specific tag, the game will end. So I have this little dot here where I started, but so far I forgot to set that as something that won't destroy me. So when I hit it, the player controller script pretty much ends because everything in the script I have dependent on that condition being false. So when I hit something, it's set to true. How I think I'm going to do in the future is I'm going to have a small raycast directly in front of the head object, just emitting from the front of it. And if, say, they impact, or the range of the raycast will be really small, so it'll be pretty much the same as if they impact, it'll detect the angle of the object that it hits, and if it is steep enough, like just a flat wall or close to one, then it will enter that crash spool will be set to true instead of just having to tag things. Because if I tag it a certain way, right here on top of this object right here. I can write on top of this object right here. I can move on top of it, but I can also hit the side of it. If I wanted to make it so that if I hit the side of it and the game ended, I would have to make the sides completely separate objects, because I would need to tag it or put it on a layer that would determine that it is a kill object. So that makes things a lot more complicated when it comes to geometry, because then for every single platform that I make, the side would have to be an object that would kill you. I think making it detect that automatically from the angle of the normal of the object would be a much more efficient way of doing that, so I'll do that in the future. This array distance thing here, let's jump over to my other script, the orthographic cam. This is what I think is probably the most interesting thing of this project that I've done so far, and that's this semi-transparent effect when I go behind objects that are obscuring the view. Because this script is actually attached to the camera, and I'll explain how it works right now, and I think it's pretty cool. In the future, I'll have it set where each of these objects that's in the way will be made semi-transparent. Right now it only works at one object at a time, but let me just go into the script here. So I have an array of obstructions, these game objects that get in the way of the view. I have an array of materials that I have called saved colors, because it used to be an array of colors, but now I changed it to materials because I use a separate way to do it now. So I have a saved material called transparent, and that material is a transparent material with a low alpha value, I believe of 35. And the main material on all the game objects in the scene are opaque. They are not transparent in any way, and you can't change the transparency without switching the material. So what I've done is I set a target for the camera. It's the camera is always in the position of that target minus an offset that I've set. So it's trying to get the exact position of the head of the snake minus the offset, so I'm moving the camera away, but it's still kind of floating above it, and it's always looking directly at that head of the snake, that target. So it's looking at that object, and it is firing a raycast directly at that object, and it is outputting hit information for whatever the raycast comes in contact with, as long as it's not the player, it's not the ground, and it's not a point object. So it is adding that object's information for just the object itself to this obstruction array, and it is adding the material of that object to this saved colors array. And then it is setting that object to a specific layer that was in the conditions for grabbing the object, just so we don't get multiple objects in the same, multiple of the same object in an array. So it's all unique elements in the array. So now we're using a for loop to cycle through that array, and we are, if what we are hitting with our raycast is an object that is in that array, we are setting the material of that object to temporarily be that transparent material set earlier. So it is grabbing the alpha value of that transparency, it is setting it as that, but is keeping the color of that object that it's grabbed. And as soon as we are not getting hit by that raycast, as soon as the objects in that array are not being hit by that raycast, we are reverting the material of that object back to its saved material. So we are not using that transparent material anymore. And I think it's very interesting. I recorded a video earlier. I will throw it up for just a second. I was running into this issue where the raycast was going through the head of the snake, into the objects behind it and temporarily making them use the transparent material, causing this flickering effect. But what's interesting about that, and what was a nice solution, is I have in the script right here, I was grabbing the distance from the camera to the head of the snake. Since the distance from the camera to the head of the snake is never changing, it's not going to have a big problem with the performance. And I can use that distance, and I can just set that to the maximum distance of the raycast. So it won't shoot past the snake, and it won't grab the objects behind it, and that flickering effect is now gone. So I can go on top of the objects, and it won't flicker anymore, and it won't hit the object. It won't hit the player object itself because it won't detect anything with the tagged player. And I think that was pretty nice. So back into the snake script. So everything's dependent on this crashed bool. If that's set to true, then nothing in here will work, which is pretty much the entirety of the script, actually. So this hit jump script, which I have right here, it doesn't need much explanation. It's just when the head hits any other element in the array, it'll cause an upward force, creating that jump that I showed, which instead of impacts, I'm going to switch the trigger as I mentioned earlier. So if I hit part of the array, I can jump back up here. I can just jump off of myself like that. So that could be used for some interesting gameplay. What I had set a few iterations ago, I had it so that the amount of objects in the array will determine how fast the snake can move. And while that is kind of an interesting concept, it doesn't work well with level design, because if the snake is constantly changing its speed, then guess what? How am I going to keep the jumps between platforms consistent whatsoever? Because if I'm getting a lot of elements in my array, I'm going to be overshooting jumps, or if I have very few, I'm going to be undershooting jumps, which that is kind of interesting, because then you might have to grab the points in a specific order, but it's kind of just overly complicated, so I'm not going to implement that. So where was I? So these are just small elements of the script that do the super jump from the boost pad, from the jump pad and the boosting. And after each of those things, where like the boost pad increases the speed, I just have a math f.lerp function thing going on within the part of the script that makes it kind of a smooth transition, so it's not instant. Though I might want later for getting that boost in speed, I might want that instant to create kind of like an interesting Sonic effect. Like in the game Sonic, when you just instantly go really fast, but you kind of slow down at some point. Well, you don't slow down, but once you finally finish boosting, it slows down, kind of like it's lerping. But it might be interesting to have it instantly boost instead of lerping into that speed. Or I could just lower the lerp amount, the lerp factor at the end right there. Boost time, that's just how long the object is boosting from the boost pad. Same with the jump controls. So that's pretty much all I have to show for this game. It's pretty interesting so far, and I'm going to put more effort into it and end up maybe potentially releasing it, but I like how it's going so far. Yeah, I've also just these blocks here and these ramps, and the speed pads and stuff themselves, I put those into a prefab folder that I have. Let's get rid of the scripts. Here's the prefabs. I have environment things and functional objects. So the functional objects are obviously stuff like points and the body segments, and the environment are like these ramps. I have set a few iterations of the ramp. Like I have ramp tall, obviously taller than the original ramp. I think it's twice the height. Tall and wide, well, it's the tallest wide one. That one's very tall. Well, it has to be, when it comes to ramps, it has to be generally proportionate, because if it's too steep, it won't go up. So these are exactly the same steepness, but you kind of have to make it taller as it is longer, not necessarily wider. That's just a specific prefab I have set here. But for these, I have wide, wide short, wide tall, and then wide super tall. Oh, that's not the right one. Here we go. Right, wide super tall. That one's much taller. And then I have small ones, small tall, small medium, small short, small super tall. And I can use that to create the levels, basic levels, to test out certain things, and I like it so far. So, what I plan on doing in the future is adding different effects to the levels. Kind of like, I don't have a specific example, but I believe there's a few like racing games or Sega Genesis, Sega Saturn games where the effect will change and it's really interesting. But probably some neon effects on the level itself, where once you meet certain requirements or a certain amount of points, or you're in a certain speed state or something like that, the colors of the player and the surroundings will change. I think that's pretty interesting. So that's all I have to show off for this so far, and see you guys later.